Hello everyone, myself Yashvi Sharma, Assistant Professor, Public Administration from Political Science and Public Administration Department at the Bhopal School of Social Sciences. Today we are going to learn about center and state relations. Before coming to the topic of center and state relation, let us first understand that what are actually the forms of government in whole world. Coming upon to the whole world, we all know that there are two forms. First is your unitary form of government, and secondly, it's the federal form of government. Unitary form of government means that whole or maximum source of power resides with the center. That means the consolidation of power in the center. For example, this has been seen in China and Japan. Coming upon to the federal form of government, where the power is divided between the center and state. There are two levels of government that is playing a major important role in center and state relation. The first entity is the center and the second entity is the state. Now, when the power is shared between these two major important entities, we can understand that yes, our India is having a federal form of structure. But is that true? No. India is quasi-federal by its structure. Quasi-federal means that we are having the proper mixture of unitary structure as well as the federal structure. One of the major authors says that federalism isn't about the state right. I repeat, federalism isn't about the state's right, dividing the power to better protect the individual liberty. The word federation is not mentioned in our Indian Constitution. In our Indian Constitution, the Article 1st itself says that India, that is Bharat, Union of States. Now, by the Union of States, we can understand that we have not made the center as the most powerful entity. We have distributed the power between both center and state. Coming upon to this center and state relations, we all know that in India, we have the quasi-federal structure. The center and state relation is divided into three major heads. That is your legislative relation, executive relation, and financial relation. In this series, we are going to understand about the legislative relations between the center and the state. The legislative relations is mentioned in the part 11 of our Indian Constitution from Article 245 to Article 255. Understanding the legislative relation between the center and state, there are four major aspects of it. We will understand it line by line. Starting with the four aspects, the first aspect is the territorial extent of center and state relation. Your second major aspects deal with the distribution of legislative subject. Third is your parliamentary legislation in the state field. And fourth is center's control over the state legislation. As I told you earlier, while studying this legislative relation, first we will try to understand that how this law-making power of our Indian government is being divided. Now let's start with the territorial extent of center and state relation. When we talk about the territorial extent of central and state legislation, we will understand it by the three major important clauses. First, we'll talk regarding with the parliament. When we look upon to the parliament, we come upon to this point that parliament has the authority that its law will be applicable either to the whole part of India or to any part of the state. Coming upon to your legislature of state, your state has the authority to basically make the law for whole state or either the part of state, either be district or be the division. But this territorial legislation says that there is one another most important clause that has not been discussed till now. That is your extraterritorial jurisdiction. According to the extraterritorial jurisdiction, it says that it means that Parliament can make law only for its own property, for its Indian residents? No. According to this extraterritorial jurisdiction, it says that the Indian Parliament can also make law outside the India. That means for outside property as well as for outside people. But now, if Parliament have right to make the law for these outside property and people, how do we able to determine it, whether the proper law is right or wrong? So to understand it, there was a decision that been made, a test that was being conducted, that is your territorial nexus test. This we will understand by the most important case which you might also have studied in the corporate law, that is Wallace versus ITC Bombay, Wallace versus Income Tax Commissionerate Bombay. In this case, we see that there is an England registered company which was having an Indian firm as a partner. Now, the Indian Income Tax Authority wanted to tax the whole income of this company. While taxing this whole income, they came upon to the conclusion that yes, Parliament can make law for this legislation, and the decision of this case says that so. This Wallace versus ITC Bombay, according to Richard Leslie, now says that now Indian Parliament can make law for outside the country as well. But as we have seen in the above slide, that Parliament can make law for India, for states, for division, for district, even for outside the India. That means that Parliament is having an absolute authority? No. Parliament does not have the absolute authority. And this we can understand by the next slide, that is your territorial extent of center and state relation of exceptions. Now these two major exceptions says that firstly, it is regarding with the President. It means that President has the right or the authority to make the law for the peace, for the governance, for the 4 major union territories. That is your Lakshadweep Island, Andaman and Nicobar Island, Daman and Diu, and Dadar and Nagar Haveli. For these 4 union territories, for peace, progress and governance, the laws regarding to these subjects will be made by the President. And if there is any sort of confusion or conflict regarding to the Parliament if have made law for these union territories, then it says that the President's last authorized decision will prevail. Coming upon to the second most important exception is regarding the second most important point over here is the governor is empowered to direct any act of the Parliament that is applicable to scheduled area in the state. You can understand it with the sixth schedule. Sixth schedule. According to the sixth schedule, there are 4 major tribal areas in these 4 states. That is AMMT, Assam, Meghalaya, Mizoram and Tripura. Now these 4 states have high proportion of tribal population in this area, and these areas are having their autonomous district council where they have their own government to be ruled. As they are being ruled by their own government, we can see over here that President wanted to keep their identity intact. We all know that we also want these tribal population to carry the civilization more further. And therefore, we have decided to give these 4 states as exception, where this governor acts as an agent of the President. And if the state legislature make the laws for these tribal areas, it is highly prominent that governor can have the interference on those laws. These were the two major exceptions which we have learned for the territorial extent of center and state relation. This was the first aspect which we have covered. Now we will move further to our next topic of this major aspect, that is subject matter legislation. There are three major lists which is being mentioned in our 7th schedule of our constitution, which says that there is union list which is having 100 subjects, and in this union list the union or the parliament has the authority to make the law for these subjects. Coming upon to the state list, which is having the 52 subject matters in it, the states have the authority to make laws on these subjects. And lastly, which is being mentioned, is the concurrent list, in which both center and state can make the law. And accordingly, if we arrange them, we can see that if there is any stage of conflict between the center, state, then it has been highly suggested that the union law will prevail. Secondly, in the terms of conflict, concurrent list law will prevail. And thirdly, the state list law will prevail. Now this is the best example where we can understand that both center and state have the equal power, but here we also have the unitary form of government. Why? Because the center's decision will prevail as most powerful. Let's start with our third major aspect, that is parliament legislation in state field. While understanding this parliament legislation in state field, we will understand that parliament has the authority to make law for the state field. We can understand it by these 5 major exceptions. First is when Rajya Sabha passes a resolution. When Rajya Sabha passes a resolution, this is regardingly when it is a topic of a national interest. When the state government is having that topic in the list which is of a national interest, then Rajya Sabha can make a resolution that state are not able to perform those proper subjects list, and now the parliament can take authority over it. Next is during your national emergency. We all know in the time of national emergency, the powers with the state government are literally come to the point of zero. States do not have the power to make the law during the emergency, as the whole authority goes to the union to make the law. Next, your third is regarding on the proclamation of president, or we also called it as the president emergency or state emergency, president rule. During the president rule, we see over here that when state is unable to take the proper authority of administration, or the state's government has been dissolved due to any sort of conflict or disturbance, then the whole authority goes to the union. Fourth is your consent or the request by 2 or more states. If there is any problem from the part, your next point is consent from 2 or more states. When there is problem regarding to any subject from the state list and the states are not able to come to any solution, then they are almost every time invited by the parliament that they can take the help from the union. So here in the fourth point, we see that center can help to the state by their own consent. When state asks for the permission for regardlessly to any solution to any problem. Last is implementing the international agreements. Implementing the international agreement, we see over here that we can understand it with the basic example. Let's take example, our union government has signed an international treaty with the United Nations regarding to chlorofluorocarbon. And let's assume that chlorofluorocarbons is under the subject list of state matter. So now the union have to take the permission from all 28 states for the ratification to implement this international agreement? No. So this exception says that the center can apply any international agreement to the states and states have to abide by it. So we have understood it, the 5 major important points which are, we can say, exception where the parliament can make laws for the state. I repeat these 5 exceptions once again. First is your national interest. Second is your national emergency. Third is on the proclamation of president. Fourth, the request or consent from 2 or more states. And your last is implementing the international agreements. Now moving towards our 4th most important consent aspect of our center and state relation is center's control over state legislation. We are going to cover the 3 major points over here. First is, the governor can reserve the bill for president assent. It means that if any of the law is passed by the state legislature and governor feels that it is not according to the national or the state interest and the permission of the president is required before passing this law, then the governor can reserve that particular bill for the president assent. The second most major control by the president or by the center over the state legislature is regarding to the president prior permission for passing some laws in the state legislature. There are some major aspects or major law which require president prior permission to be, where the president's prior permission is required before passing that particular bill. And last is your president can direct the state to reserve the financial bill. As we all know that financial bill are always being passed before the permission from the president and before the speaker decides it that whether this bill will be considered as money bill or not. Hence, we can see over here that president can direct the state to reserve the financial bill because the prior permission of president is required to introduce this financial bill in the house. I hope you all have understood the center and state relations by heart. I hope we will meet soon. Thank you.